important to these, our selection process and refining those and basically eliminating options that aren't satisfying the criteria to this committee's satisfaction. Preferred schematic report, getting into it in more detail with MSBA, really refining those options, developing massing building geometry and design studies of the site, scoping out the materials and the mechanical systems, and then final assessment, and then selecting that preferred option, getting that approved by MSBA signifies the end of feasibility study. And like I mentioned before, schematic design, you're bringing the design for that preferred option to a level to where it can be construction cost estimated. There's enough specifics developed about it in accordance with what MSBA requires for us to then establish our maximum project budget for the whole life of the project, as well as our maximum grant from MSBA. I have a couple stars here, mostly just to remind me to point out and give you guys really kudos for your early jump on the existing conditions evaluations with Habib, as well as the educational visioning efforts with MLP. When we get into the construction cost side of these projects and we're working through the options and we're looking at the numbers on monthly construction cost escalation, and you compare that to some of the funds that were put up front to get this work done and get an early jump on that, you're gonna agree with me that that was an amazing decision outside looking in. It's really gonna pay dividends. Spoke to this before, but I wanna highlight the importance of educational visioning and the education plan, right? So the MLP educational visioning meetings, really just, we made this graphic just to show how these all kind of, culminate into one another. So the educational visioning meetings, you were determining project goals and requirements. Again, we kind of tend to oversimplify with these graphics a little bit, which then lets you produce the education plan through a series of submissions to MSBA, a bit more iterative of a process than we're showing here with the straight lines. But that education plan is really our rubric for how we're judged from that point forward with MSBA. It defines teaching and learning experience at the new or renovated school, and it's our scorecard with MSBA moving forward and the justification for everything we do. Once the education plan is really established, we'll get into the space programming meetings with the selected designer, of course. All of this is with the selected designer. The types, number, sizes of spaces, and the adjacencies. And then we get into right-sizing the building via the MSBA space summary template, which we have on a slide coming up in a little bit. And it's also the way that we justify spaces to the MSBA. So in this program, MSBA has a recommended number of square footage that they will participate in for each different component of the building. And when I say, I want to kind of explain what I mean by that. So justifying eligibility to MSBA, just to make sure this is clear. Triton's reimbursement rate, your preliminary reimbursement rate as of right now is, I can do this with the mouse, 47.84%, right? That does not mean that the MSBA will be reimbursing 47.84% of project costs. They will be reimbursing 47.84% of eligible project costs. And the difference really is there's all sorts of items that MSBA has upper limits on how much they'll reimburse. There's thresholds that once you reach, they'll no longer participate in those. And there's categorically ineligible items that you can spend that money, but MSBA will not reimburse it. And it's kind of their way of leveling the playing field. Just a quick, easy example for each one. Furniture costs over $1,915 per student. If you spend $3,000 per student, that difference of $1,085, if I can do quick math, is ineligible per student. And on the categorically ineligible items, an important one to point out here is district administration space for regional school districts. The MSBA's way of kind of leveling the playing field. So long story, kind of long. This slide's here just to say, PM8, we're experts at this, navigating the MSBA cost caps, navigating the MSBA grant program. We know how to maximize Triton's reimbursement, how to assign costs throughout the project, and really lock in, justify that square footage to MSBA, as I mentioned before, via the ed plan, and maximize the grant to the greatest extent possible. We've also identified a few potential incentive points for Triton, and this could really be a presentation on its own. I'm going to try to keep going, but a few incentive points that are likely for the project. You've submitted during the SOI phase a ton of information on your maintenance practices for the building. They'll give you 0 to 2 incentive points that'll increase that reimbursement rate moving forward. So at the end of schematic design, MSBA will give what's called a maximum MSBA grant. And it's our job to make sure that as much of that is received as possible. Okay, So the MSBA process I mentioned before involves exploring multiple different construction options throughout the feasibility study. A base renovation, an ad reno, and new construction options, multiple schemes for each one of those, really. It'll be a renovation on this side, an addition over here, different options for each. And when you have multiple student enrollments, you actually have to do twice as many because you'll do one for 895 and one for 1070 students. So really, I have this slide here to point out, obviously we're aware there's multiple enrollments. That's been part of the whole RFS for the architect as well. And just a quick note that kind of overly explaining potentially, but early on in these projects, before we have buildings defined, before we know what the building materials are, the structural or mechanical systems, we're looking at things on a cost per square foot basis. So the largest driver of cost is square footage. When you're working with the MSBA, the largest driver of square footage is students. So all these things are kind of correlated with each other, right? Again, probably a little self-explanatory. This is the MSBA space summary template that I mentioned before. I mentioned that there's cost caps in dealing with their reimbursements. There's also limits within the space summary templates, which I know your team is partially aware of some of them. Again, these are things that we'll navigate with the design team at the appropriate time, but just want to bring this to your attention now. Gymnasium limit sizes, auditorium based on number of students, right? I mentioned before the district administration space categorically ineligible. So this is a series of submissions to MSBA. One of these spreadsheets for each one of those construction options will be required, and it's longer than this, probably about a quarter of the rows. So significant effort that we'll all have to work through together. We understand loud and clear that PMA's role is not to come in here and schedule meetings and sit there while you talk to the architect about what you want and then hope that the architect listens and doesn't just design what they want. We understand that our role is to come in and obviously we're scheduling the meetings, we're attending the meetings, right? But we're active participants, we're writing down what's said, and we're making sure that what's on these space summary templates in terms of the spaces required within are reflected of the discussions at those meetings. This will be a project for you and not for the selected designer, right? They'll be a part of it, obviously, but this will be Triton. Okay, I've gone a little bit long, but a few quick kind of project management things to check really quickly. So PMA will handle all budget tracking for the project. We'll also establish the maximum total project cost based on the construction cost estimates performed by us and the architect. We have a sample of our budget sheet here. We have it all tied out to the MSBA cost codes, which is really helpful for us in navigating the MSBA ProPay system, which we'll also handle, as well as the MSBA online OPM reports. Thank you so much, Brian and Rich, for getting us all set up with MSBA. It's amazing. Our contract was executed a little over a week ago, and the progress we've made to date is awesome. So we're set up to get our first OPM report submitted, and we'll submit those every month throughout the life of the project, as well as once we start rolling with the architect, monthly reimbursement requests via the ProPay progress payment system. Really just great for cash flow purposes. You don't have to wait until the project is final closed out with MSBA to get a large grant. They allow you to submit monthly. So along the lines of cash flow, this is my last slide, I promise. We are experts at forecasting cash flow, actualizing, and we'll work with your bond counsel at the appropriate time to help optimize borrowing strategies for the project. All right, that was a lot of information all at once. And if there's no questions, are there any questions? Sorry.
I was going to say, probably worth pausing
Yeah.
to make sure there aren't any questions. I think a lot of that, like you and I have talked, Joe, we've done a lot of review, and so I think the committee is generally aware of the process, but it's certainly helpful to have this level of detail. But
Absolutely.
any other questions? No. Cool, these are the quick meetings.
Well, again, you can hear me good? Phenomenal. So again, I'm Anthony Lopresti, project manager with PMA. Happy to be on board here and work on this project. So, for some reason, the mouse just went all over the place here. Let me pull the slides up again. Alrighty, so MSBA designer selection process. So it's really where Triton's at right now in the project. So just here's a larger overview of the process itself, and we'll get into each section a little bit more. But really 4 key steps here. First step, developing the designer request for services, very similar to the owner's project manager effort that you guys just undertook. Happy to report again, like Joe said, we got going right away and got that submitted to the MSBA actually last Friday. So that kind of kickstarts a 10-day review period with the MSBA where they take a look at our RFS, make comments, we make edits, then the RFS is approved. That actually locks in your designer selection panel date, and we'll get into that in a bit. But anyways, happy to say that that draft is into the MSBA, and then second step will be actually receiving proposals from design firms. Third step will be going to the designer selection panel, which is a panel made up of 13 members from the MSBA and 3 members from the district. And then obviously the fourth step will be selecting the right fit, ultimately, the strongest team that has the most applicable experience and is best for the project. So that first step there, designer request for service, the RFS, it's an MSBA standard template that gets specified to the project you're working on, in this case, Triton. So that has to get approved from the MSBA before you advertise. Again, we started that process on Friday. I think we should be getting comments back by the 23rd. We'll make final edits, and then we're actually allowed to advertise. So we have to advertise in the Central Register in a local paper, which we're working with Brian and Rich on already, and we're targeting February 11th for that. From there, there's a 4-week designer response period. Really, it's a 4-week period where they put their proposals together and submit to us. So March 11th will be the due date. But also as part of that advertisement process, there has to be an informational site walkthrough at Triton, and that's tentatively scheduled for the 18th. So jumping in right to the designer selection panel, the DSP, arguably the most important step of this process, but it's made up again of 16 voting members, 13 from the MSBA and 3 from the district. The MSBA members are various industry experts and backgrounds, and then the 3 district representatives are based off these requirements here. Later on the agenda, we actually have a vote to establish the designer selection subcommittee. Not exactly those 3 members, but that committee ultimately will be responsible for reviewing the designer proposals and nominating those 3 district representatives based off these guidelines. But really, the point of this slide is to say, you can see there's 16 equal votes. The MSBA has 13, and we have 3, right? So it's a collaborative process with the MSBA, and it's really PMA's job to make sure that the 3 district representatives, when they go to the DSP, are, well-versed in being able to speak about the pros and cons of each firm and making sure that Triton gets the best firm for the project, and we'll get into how PMA will prep the district representatives in a little bit. Just to review the designer submissions. So again, once we get those proposals on March 11th, PMA will distribute those to the designer selection subcommittee members for review. At the same time, PMA is going to be responsible for verifying the submissions are complete and adequate. We'll develop the MSBA required matrix of design sub-consultants. We'll perform reference checks, MSBA forms, make sure the designers have all the required consultants that were listed in the RFS, make sure they filled out the required forms that were attached to the RFS, stuff like that. And then at the same time, we'll work with the designer selection subcommittee in breaking down the proposals. These are lengthy proposals from the architects, dozens, if not hundreds of pages that have a lot of information in them. So it's a lot to digest. So we'll work with the designer selection subcommittee to make sure, you have cheat sheets and whatnot on these firms. That way, when you go to the MSBA, like we've done with other districts, you're well versed in speaking about each firm and you're successful in getting the firm that's right for the project. Want to highlight here that there is no official scoring or ranking prior to the DSP meeting. Again, it's a collaborative process with the MSBA, like Brian said earlier, and they have a large say, obviously, in what firm ultimately gets the project. And that's a good thing too, right? Because they know what design firms are working on other projects, who's been selected recently, so they want to make sure the district gets the right firm for the project. So this is just an example of one of the things that the designer selection subcommittee will have at their arsenal in understanding the design firms. So at the top of the chart here, you can see designers, 1 through 8. On the left-hand side will be, applicable RFS criteria that each firm will kind of get ranked against, right? And again, no scoring before the MSBA DSP, but something like this will help you understand and break down, each firm and the pros and cons and who's responsible. The green right here means highly advantageous. The yellow, partially. The red, not so advantageous. And the whole point, again, is making sure that the district, when they go to the DSP, is well-versed and can advocate for Triton and get the firm that we think is right for the project. I don't know if Joe has anything to add on that.
I'll just quickly add, yeah, we'll also make sure that the 3 representatives have a Word document for each applicant so that you're willing, and you basically said this, but you're able to speak to every single firm there, whether they had the most green dots or the most red dots, and explain why throughout your review you felt they were very respondent to your RFS or not. We find that, we'll arm you with these cheat sheets that'll say firm name, team members, experience with the firm, similar projects, and then summarizing the pros and cons of what we discussed with the subcommittee so that those 3 members are well-spoken. When we're at the meeting, PMA, we're allowed to attend. We sit behind those 3, and we're not actually allowed to talk. We're not allowed to come up and whisper things to you. So, yeah, it's... Anthony got in trouble for clicking his pen too loud at the last one we were at together, not even joking. We need to arm you all with these cheat sheets and make sure that you're well-spoken on each one. We have a very high success rate of walking out of these meetings with the preferred designer for our applicants because we prep those representatives to just speak about every single firm, and I'm sorry I'm repeating myself.
Are these meetings in person again, or are they packed, or are they still virtual?
I don't know.
That's a great question. The last one I was at was virtual, but that was a number of years ago now. We'll follow up on that and let you know.
Yeah. And just the last slide on this process here. This is an overview of the timeline we're tracking against. So again, we got the RFS submitted to MSBA review on the 9th. They owe us comments by the 23rd. Once that gets finalized, the RFS will be live, on February 11th in the Central Register. We'll have the briefing session, the walkthrough at Triton on the 18th of February. Proposals will be due March 11th. We'll have about 2 weeks or so to do that kind of cursory review and what we've just talked about of digesting all the proposals. We'll submit our evaluation to the MSBA, and then we have the April 7th designer selection panel meeting set up here on that timeline. Do want to note at the end of the timeline, you'll see there's kind of 2 different target dates there. There's April 8th, begin contract negotiations, and April 21st. And I just want to say, really, at this point, it's hard to say if we'll need a second designer selection panel meeting. Really, what dictates it is the number of firms that actually submit a proposal for the project, and at that first DSP meeting, if there's a clear favorite. So, if 10 firms submit for Triton, it's probably going to be hard to come out of that first meeting with a selected firm because there's so much information to digest. The MSBA and you guys will ultimately come up with a short list that you'll then interview at the second meeting. And that actually brings a benefit too. You get to, see the people that are actually on these proposals and hear them advocate for why they think their firm should be selected for the project. The other scenario could be, only 3 firms say submit for the project. And at that first meeting with the MSBA, you all walk away with a shared understanding or agreement that there's a clear favorite, and the MSBA will allow you to just negotiate a contract directly with them without having to have a second meeting or go through interviews. So it's hard to say at this point, what we'll end up with. But ultimately, the goal here and what we're tracking towards is having a designer on board by the end of April to get going in the feasibility study. Okay. So ultimately, at this point, if there are no questions on that process, we're happy to discuss anything that we just went through. I know it's a lot of information and ran through it pretty quick, but if not, we would ask that the committee vote to establish that designer selection subcommittee. And we're happy to explain what that is again if need be.
So just to confirm, so it's this, I know there's 3 people that attend the DSP. That can be a larger committee here that does the evaluation and the color-coded ranking.
Correct. Yep.
Would you say there's a suggested number?
Really, it comes down to people's availability. We understand that everyone here likely is, has a full-time job or some people may have less interest in the design side of things. So it varies, I would say. You said we're 1 person short tonight?
There's 3 or 4 missing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say typically maybe for a building committee this size, it would be around a third to half of the building committee. Okay. And it's just those who have
6 to 8
industry
people or something like
experience.
that.
And, yeah.
Okay.
It has the potential to be a pretty big lift, right? So that's a part of it. And we do our best to try to minimize that by handling the statutory review and the reference checks and all that. But just reading all the different applications and their similar project experience and how they tie those together, will take a decent amount of time, so.
So what would you say, commitment-wise, sitting around the table?
I hate when people say it depends, but it depends on the number of applications, right?
And are there interviews of the applicants as well?
If we go to that second MSBA design.
So, but we first just rank, the subcommittee would rank all of them.
Yes, but unofficially, because in the eyes.
Unofficially, that's right. I would never say officially, because Anthony will get in
Yes.
trouble for clicking his pen.
We identify those that appear to be the most advantageous, just to be, but, and then we present that, and we hope that through the conversations at the table with the MSBA, they feel the same at the DSP and that voting. So all 16 members get 3 votes. You give 3 points to your number 1 preferred, you give 2 points to your number 2, and 1 point to your number 3 preferred at the end of the discussions, right? And they go around and they tally the points. So if, like Anthony said, if there's only a few applications, and if the majority of the table is giving those 3 points to one firm, you might just walk out on April 7th with that architect. But if there's 10 applications and 5 of them seem like they could do a really good job, you'll probably end up interviewing those at that 2 week later.
And even if, the scenario, I think, one of our designer selection subcommittees, there was only 3 firms that submitted, and it ended up being that you still had to interview those 3 firms because they were so tight that there was value in actually having the interviews, right? It's hard to take everything from a piece of paper and understand really who knows the job best. So ultimately on that job, the 3 firms that submitted all got interviewed, right? So it's not just one size fits all too, where if you only have a select number that you walk out of that first meeting.
I think depending how in-depth people get with their reviews, right? We're talking about reading at least 25 pages per application, right? And then sharing your thoughts and meeting with us, and we'll compile things and then ask that those, everyone's feedback is reflected and kind of accumulated correctly, so.
So several hours of prep outside. And
For
then
sure.
Yes.
Probably
For sure.
a few hours in a single meeting?
Yes, and it's all within that
2 week
relatively
period,
tight time span between March 11th and April 7th.
Gotcha. And that can be based on, that can happen whenever it works best for the group?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, I want to point out, Brian, I know you're aware, but we're technically not locked in to the 7th. The MSBA has to approve that draft RFS. Once they approve it, they'll tell you, okay, you are confirmed for this date. Now, I believe they meet monthly, twice a month. So, but we're really trying, this was the earliest we could meet with them. So you can see we got technically approved from the MSBA on the 5th. We got that RFS submitted to them on the 9th to lock in that date.
Can I ask 2 quick questions?
Of course.
What have you seen lately for numbers coming in? Does it really vary, or has
It does vary. I know for a project over the summer, there was 4 firms that submitted, and they had to go to a second designer selection panel meeting for 3 of the 4 to interview.
Okay. Is it frequent that you're seeing, like, you had 8 in your sample?
I haven't come across that many, but you may have.
So it's
for-
typically on the lower end?
It depends on the project and the estimated project cost, as well as the scope, obviously, and then the market, what's happening right now with the private sector. But I think the one that we had on the screen, I won't say who the architects were, but that was Saugus Middle High School, and that was, close to 8 or so years ago now. 6 through 12 school project, no Chapter 74 programs, no, they had enough room to explore renovation and new construction options on site, 125-ish million construction costs. So that drew a lot of interest from people. There's factors for this project. Regional districts sometimes scare some of our design firms away, just speaking bluntly and kind of off the top. But I think the lack of Chapter 74 programming might get you somewhere, if I had to guess, and I always regret guessing, close to probably 5 to 6 applicants on this
I
project.
didn't want to put that
And
pressure on
no,
you.
I know, and make fun of me if I'm wrong.
No.
I don't take myself too serious. But we've been reaching out to the architects that we work with and that we think would be a great fit for this project before the RFS is issued, obviously, and then we can't talk to them. But we're trying to drum up the interest on our end as well.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thanks. And I guess my other question is, I know one of your jobs is to help us sort of avoid danger zones. Are there pitfalls in this process? It seems like it's pretty prescriptive. Is there anything we need to sort of watch out for as we're going through it?
That's a good question. I think through our process of avoiding going to the MSBA meeting saying, here's our ranking, right? Or going there and not being able to be well-spoken about the different applicants. I think those are the pitfalls where you feel like you walk in and you walk out like you didn't have control over who you ended up with, and your voice kind of got lost at the table. So we generally have a lot of really good success with this process. And like Anthony said, the MSBA feedback piece of it and the DSP feedback, it's pretty valuable because I did a project, I won't say which one because it might become obvious, but we went into the DSP and we had one that we thought was checking all the boxes. We loved the team, the experience was unbelievable. They put so much thought and came up with these really cool schemes. And at that meeting, the MSBA said, you've had this project manager on the last 4 interviews over the last 3 months. There's no way he's going to be able to do that. You're bait and switching. He was fantastic. He was the reason why we love that firm. And we ended up, after the interview process, going with number 2, right? So MSBA does have a lot of intel that we otherwise couldn't unless they were all PMA projects.
Yeah, and I would just add that, being, like Joe said, really those 3 members really have to be super prepared and ready to speak strongly on the firm you think is the best. Because ultimately there could be members from the MSBA that feel differently, right? And ultimately it's up to those 3 members. Like Joe said, we can't really speak to it during the meeting. It's up to those 3 members to advocate on behalf of the district.
I rambled for a bit. Did I answer your question?
No, yeah, I think
Okay.
that's good. I mean,
All right.
it seems pretty straightforward, but you just never know walking in. I'm sure you guys have seen a million things go wrong. So
Absolutely.
I just don't want that to happen here.
Other questions? If you guys need a little bit more time to, I don't know when our next building committee meeting is, but if you think you need more time to gauge interested people, we don't want to put you all on the spot either. Completely up to you all here. And I know there's people who aren't present today who may want to be involved as well. So however you want to go about that. I love that. Yeah. You missed the meeting, so
A lot
now
of
here's your homework.
voluntolding.
Yep.
So tell me again the time frame.
Of the review period?
Yeah.
It's March 11th to March 25th.
March 11th.
Yeah.
So we'll have a February meeting that we could confirm if you wanted to gather interest as the chair. Or, I mean, I think if people are here and want to step up and say, I want to definitely be part of that, some of us that don't have the option of not being part of that, sorry. But yeah, certainly we can, you, Matt, want to.
How's everyone feeling? I'm happy to do it either way. I mean, kind of hard to do it when everyone's here and if everyone can't be involved, but.
There are these requirements too for the 3 Triton representatives ultimately that have to be those 3 members. One of whom shall be designated by the school committee, district school committee, or board of trustees of the eligible applicant, as the case may be.
So does that mean me and Narissa are school committee members, one of us has to?
Yeah.
Narissa?
Right.
That's it.
One of whom shall be the superintendent of schools of the eligible applicant, ex officio, or his or her designee. Right. So Brian, him or he can nominate someone. Right. And then one of whom shall be the CEO of the city or town that is eligible applicant, or hers, its designee, or in all of the cases, a member of the school building committee, designated by the school building committee. So kind of anyone in this room. So there are some specifics that you probably want at least on that subcommittee that's going to look at the proposals, right? And then that subcommittee can ultimately then decide who the 3 are based off these limitations.
Yeah, and we don't need to iron those 3 out now at all. It's
Correct,
more about-
correct.
So who's interested? No? Yeah, you are. I don't
No,
know.
I was just only kidding. I was kidding.
Yeah.
So what's a good number? A third?
That's just sometimes what we see. Sometimes there's more people interested, sometimes there's less. So
Correct, yeah.
it's typically around a third to a half, but that doesn't mean that it
We had like 8 people.
can't be less or more.
I mean, I'm happy to do it. I don't either way.
I was just going to suggest that if we have another meeting in the time frame that's not going to, is there a date that this is due by, or it pushes things out, or no? Okay, so this could be any time before. Okay.
You probably want it established before you receive proposals.
Okay.
Which is March. So we
March.
have,
So, yeah,
yes, we have time. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll hover over.
I don't know, my thought would be that give people who are here a chance to think on it. Brian or Matt sends out an email to the folks who aren't here. If they could not attend the next meeting, then they need to indicate, like whoever can't come, right? If you're interested, they need to let Brian or Matt know so that we can have an intelligent discussion around everyone that's potentially eligible at the next meeting. That would be my thought. But
And we're more than happy to rerun through those slides again too, just for their sake, if they're interested in being a part of that.
they can watch them.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. Watch me drop my water.
We did have that actually as one of the agenda items, not to jump around on the agenda, but meeting schedule was actually one of the items. So I don't know if we want to establish at least the February meeting, and then we could talk about a recurring meeting schedule, or Brian, really, that's up to you guys.
I think we had talked about Thursdays at 6:30 being good for people. I think we're at a spot where we're saying, let's just meet the last Thursday of the month.
Okay.
Seems where we're at. It's been the third or fourth Thursday, so if we just say the last Thursday of every month,
Okay.
that puts us the last Thursday of February. We end up with a, one more meeting, like you said,
Yeah.
Marissa, Matt can poll.
And I don't think that's school vacation week, right? Because the vacation week is the week before, in case anyone has travel coming.
Oh, was that DCC that night?
I thought it was. I was like, isn't that DCC? It's all on the Linda and you do on the DCC, right?
The what?
The DCC's up to you and Linda, right? That's the dates, because it says tentatively on DCC. Am I not right on that, Rich?
I think we held the second one just because we needed to at the end of February last year. But let me just double check.
Yeah, that was when we had
Yeah, so I
added-
think it was a meet on the 12th, and if you need a second meeting on the 26th, have it. I don't know if we'd use that at this point or not, given that we don't even have the governor's budget yet to even have a preliminary look at what may be coming our way for budget season.
Yeah.
You know, at least as far as assessment calculations and all that stuff that can really throw us off.
Yep.
What was the March dates again?
March 11th is when the proposals are due, and then we need to have our evaluation submitted to the MSBA by March 25th.
Okay. So if we met on March 5th,
Right there before that.
Yeah.
is
Yep.
what it is.
Say, PMA will meet whenever works for you guys. So
We're not available then. Okay. So, all right, so does that make sense? We have a lot of thoughts around the table. So February is going to be here and gone before you know it.
Yeah.
So if the 26th is off the table, like Anthony said, the week prior is February break. We could meet as early as February 12th, I don't think, or.
No, there's a meeting there.
Oh, there's a DCC there, yes. So does March 5th make sense? That gives us enough time, full interest, and then we'll be able to formally establish that designer review committee.
I think my only concern is that's still in snow season, and we've had to cancel meetings for snow season before and then gotten ourselves into trouble with the posting dates and stuff like that, because the next Wednesday is the 11th. I mean, we can try, and if for some reason we have to cancel that night, you would have to schedule, no choice, for either
We could always push the DCC.
9th or the 10th.
I was gonna say we could push a DCC out too, depending on budget stuff.
I'd rather push the DCC than this meeting.
If we had to meet on the 12th, that wouldn't be too big of a deal either. It would just be, we'd be starting one day behind, but it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be the
push the
worst
whole thing
thing.
out?
If we're sticking to Thursdays, and maybe I should just mute my mic and butt out, but
No.
just FYI,
That's fair.
that wouldn't kill us on our end of the table.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we can talk with Linda as a chair and see if we want to adjust, if we think we'll be using that DCC meeting, and if not, we could use the 26th, and if not, If we need to hold that, then we'll push it to the 5th of March. Does that work for both of you guys?
Yeah, we'll make it work.
Okay, I'm seeing nods all around. This is the way.
Perfect.
Awesome.
I'll speak to this very briefly, Anthony. So we watched the December 18th Building Committee meeting. We heard the update about the Communications Subcommittee. So this is just a copy and paste of our agenda slide, lazily highlighting the items that we didn't address in our presentation. So we were curious if there were any updates to share tonight. Obviously, at the right time, PMA would love to get involved in those efforts, and maybe that's a better item for March, but thought it made sense.
I think
to
it
add
will
to
be, or the
agenda.
February meeting, because Patrick Heffernan, who was the chair, was not able to be here tonight. So
Gotcha.
we'll also connect with him, and then we can
Makes sense.
circle back to that at the February meeting, or the March meeting, February-March meeting.
And then I would just open the floor at any questions or whatnot. The only final item on the agenda was adjournment, but obviously we're happy to talk anything through, go back to any slides, stuff like that.
Yeah, I feel like we've been talking about having an OPM for like 5 years. So we have an OPM. Are there any questions for these guys? I mean, we got a lot of time with them, but are there any other questions, timelines, process?
We'll hang out for a little after too.
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't like asking questions in a
Oh,
forum, but
Joe, you haven't met this group. You like questions. Marissa, did you have a question? You did, didn't you?
I do, kind of.
I did see them making fun of you for one of the previous meetings. Yeah.
No, my question actually is, it was towards the communication subcommittee. Is it typical to do, we've talked about like, kind of trying to have communications ongoing to, keep visibility high. Is it typical to do like a press release for a PMA or for a OPM?
Yeah, we've seen that. We've seen, similar to getting accepted into the module 2, they do a press release on that and then a press release for selecting the OPM. Sometimes it comes out at the same time as the one for the designer.
Okay.
And it includes their designs and things like people get excited about that. But LPMs are a little boring with our schedules and budgets, but we're happy to, if that would be helpful, if you guys are interested in that, we're happy to.
I was going to say, first of all, we like your schedules and budgets. And second of all, I mean, we had talked about doing that internally, about doing a
good.
combined, like, we have the design team and doing a press release for that. We could do two, but.
I love the idea of doing multiple, if we can stage them up even a couple of months apart, just to stay frame of mind. We know the newspapers will run them for us, right? So I just think it makes sense. I don't know, that's my personal opinion, but I don't know, I also don't know what Patrick had in mind, so.
Yeah, I mean,
If there'd
I think
been
we can
discussion.
do that using Ketty and get that out. And then, the formal communications, I think is going to be much more formal, but yeah, I will take that.
When we meet next, PMA is happy to share some slides about, some of the communication strategies that we've, endeavored on these projects, whether it's Facebook pages, Instagram pages, the project website, which you guys are already obviously off to a great start on that effort, things like that, and how we reach the public. So happy to speak about that in a little bit more detail. A lot of that is when the architect's on board. It's that exciting phase where we have all these preliminary options and we're gathering all this like educational, framework of how we want to deliver these projects and getting the community engaged in that. Obviously, it's a challenge on all these projects because people are busy. Not that people are disinterested, but people just have a lot going on in their lives. And every single project I've ever been on, it's been a challenge of how can we get people interested in this project. And over the years, we've come up with some creative things that have worked well. So, and obviously, we'll hear out you guys. And we were thrilled to see that there's a communication subcommittee that's going to be rolling, and we're happy to complement that effort as we can.
Great.
So can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
All those in favor?
Thank you all. Welcome.
Thank you all very much.